Jesus was crucified, nailed to a cross, and he suffered through unimaginable pain. But how did it all begin? On the night of Passover, in a garden called Gethsemane, he was betrayed by one of his most trusted disciples, Judas Iscariot. And the most shocking part? Jesus saw it coming. At the Last Supper, he looked at his disciples and said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." He knew exactly who it would be. He even told Judas directly, "What you are about to do, do quickly." But why didn't he stop it? Why didn't he run? Why didn't he use his divine power to prevent what was about to happen? Because what we're about to explore goes far beyond a simple execution. It was part of something much bigger, something that had been foretold for centuries. Before we continue this incredible story from Scripture, take a moment to subscribe to our Bible Stories channel and hit that notification bell. Every week we dive deep into the Word, bringing these ancient truths to life. If you want to understand the Bible like never before, this is the channel for you. Now let's get back to the story that changed history forever. As Mark's Gospel tells us, Judas didn't come alone to Gethsemane. He brought with him a crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and elders. And how would they know which man to arrest in the darkness? Judas gave them a sign. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." Picture this scene. The garden is quiet except for the rustling of olive leaves. The disciples are heavy with sleep, despite Jesus asking them 3 times to stay awake and pray. Then torches appear in the distance, growing brighter as they approach. Judas steps forward from the armed crowd, and with a greeting of "Rabbi," he kisses Jesus on the cheek. The betrayal is complete. The soldiers surround Jesus. Peter, in a moment of desperate courage, draws a sword and cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant. But Jesus, even in this moment of betrayal, heals the man's ear and says, "Put your sword back in its place. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels?" This wasn't a man caught by surprise. This was someone willingly walking into what was coming next. What followed was a mockery of justice. First, Jesus was taken to Annas, a former high priest with significant influence. Then to Caiaphas, the current high priest, where the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, had gathered in the middle of the night. This alone violated their own laws about when trials could be held. Mark tells us, "They brought many false witnesses against him, but their statements did not agree." Finally, the high priest stood up and asked Jesus directly, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus, "and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." At this, the high priest tore his clothes in horror. "Why do we need any more witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy." They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit on him. They blindfolded him and struck him with their fists, saying, "Prophesy, who hit you?" The guards took him and beat him. But this was only the beginning, because they needed Roman permission to execute him. At daybreak, they took Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. John's Gospel gives us the most detailed account of this encounter. Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." As the questioning proceeded, it became clear even to Pilate that Jesus had done nothing deserving death. He tried to release him, following the custom of freeing one prisoner during the Passover feast. "Do you want me to release the King of the Jews?" Pilate asked, using the title mockingly. But the crowd, stirred up by the chief priests, shouted for a murderer named Barabbas instead. "What shall I do then with the one you call the King of the Jews?" Pilate asked. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" Pilate asked. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas and handed Jesus over to be flogged and crucified. John tells us that Pilate took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." What came next was one of the most brutal forms of physical torture in the ancient world, the Roman flagrum. This wasn't a simple whip, but a multi-thonged instrument, with metal balls and sharp pieces of bone or metal embedded in the ends, designed not just to cause pain, but to tear away the flesh. Historical records from that time period tell us that many victims didn't survive this preliminary torture. They died before they ever reached the cross. The Romans had a limit of 39 lashes, not from mercy, but because 40 would often kill the victim. With each stroke, the sharp fragments would cut deeper and deeper. The back, legs, and even parts of the abdomen would be shredded. Severe blood loss, severe pain. Some accounts describe victims with bones and inner organs exposed after this punishment. And Jesus endured every lash. Matthew's Gospel tells us what happened next. The governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. They twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" These weren't just any thorns. In the Near East, these thorns could be 1 to 2 inches long, hard and sharp as nails. When pressed onto his head, they would pierce the highly vascular scalp, causing significant bleeding and excruciating pain. They continued the mockery by spitting on him and taking the staff and striking him on the head again and again, driving those thorns deeper with each blow. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. John tells us Jesus carried his own cross, but the other gospel accounts mention that a man from Cyrene named Simon was forced to carry it for him. This makes sense medically. After the blood loss and trauma Jesus had already endured, he would likely have been too weak to carry the entire crossbeam, which could weigh up to 100 pounds. The path from the Praetorium to Golgotha, the place of execution, was deliberately public. The Romans wanted everyone to see what happened to those who challenged their authority. Jesus would have been forced to walk approximately 600 meters through the crowded streets of Jerusalem, which during Passover would have been filled with visitors from across the Jewish world. Luke's Gospel adds a poignant detail. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children." Even in his suffering, he was thinking of others. When they came to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull, they offered Jesus wine mixed with myrrh, a mild analgesic to dull the pain. He refused it. He would drink this cup of suffering fully conscious. Mark's account is stark in its simplicity, and they crucified him. 3 words that contain unimaginable suffering. The victim would be laid on the ground atop the crossbeam. Heavy, square iron nails about 5 to 7 inches long would be driven through the wrists. Not the palms, as commonly depicted, because the palms couldn't support the body's weight. These nails would crush or sever the major nerve that runs through the wrist, causing excruciating pain to shoot up the arms. The very word excruciating comes from the Latin for out of the cross, pain so intense it needed its own word. Next, they would raise the crossbeam and attach it to the vertical beam. The feet would be nailed to the front of the cross, with the knees bent slightly. Again, the nails would pass through major nerve bundles, causing more searing pain. The positioning was diabolically clever. In this position, to exhale, the victim would have to push up on his nailed feet, scraping his shredded back against the rough wood. Eventually, exhaustion would set in. The victim could no longer push up to breathe out properly. Carbon dioxide would build up in the bloodstream. The lungs could not fully empty. Each breath would become shallower than the last. This is why crucifixion victims died of asphyxiation. They eventually became too exhausted to breathe. During those 6 hours on the cross, from approximately 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, Jesus spoke 7 times, each phrase revealing something profound. First, as they were driving the nails into his hands and feet, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Even in his agony, he was extending mercy. To the repentant thief beside him, he promised, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Even while dying, he was offering salvation. Seeing his mother at the foot of the cross, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple John, "Here is your mother." Even in his final moments, he was ensuring his mother would be cared for. Then, around noon, darkness fell over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, and at the 9th hour Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Here, bearing the sin of the world, he experienced for the first and only time in all eternity separation from his Father. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that Scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." In response, they soaked a sponge in wine vinegar, put it on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to his lips. After receiving the drink, Jesus declared, "It is finished." In the original Greek, tetelestai, a word that was commonly written on business documents or receipts in New Testament times to show that a bill had been paid in full. The debt was settled. Finally, with one last surge of strength, he called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," and with that, he breathed his last. At that moment, something unprecedented happened. Matthew tells us, "The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open." Let's consider each of these events. The temple curtain, a massive veil separating the holy place from the most holy place, was torn from top to bottom. This wasn't a small tear. This curtain was approximately 60 feet high, 30 feet wide, and as thick as a man's hand. No human could have torn it, especially from top to bottom. And its tearing symbolized that the way to God was now open through Christ. The earth shook. This wasn't merely poetic language, it was a real earthquake that split rocks. Geological evidence from the region confirms significant seismic activity around this time period. Most astonishingly, tombs broke open, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. Nature itself was responding to the death of its creator. Even the Roman centurion, a man who had likely witnessed countless crucifixions, was so moved by these events that he exclaimed, "Surely this man was the Son of God." John's Gospel adds one more crucial detail. Because the next day was a special Sabbath, the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the crosses, so they asked Pilate to have the legs broken to hasten death, a practice called Crucifixion. Breaking the legs meant victims could no longer push themselves up to breathe, leading to rapid asphyxiation. The soldiers broke the legs of the 2 men crucified with Jesus. But when they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. This detail is medically significant. The separation of blood and water indicates that Jesus likely experienced pericardial effusion, water, and pleural effusion, blood, the collection of fluid around the heart and lungs associated with severe physical trauma and heart failure. John emphasizes, "The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe." He understood the significance of what he witnessed. As evening approached, a wealthy man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had become a disciple of Jesus, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. This was no small risk. Openly identifying with a man executed for sedition could have serious consequences. Pilate was surprised to hear that Jesus was already dead. He summoned the centurion to verify it before giving Joseph permission to take the body. Joseph, joined by Nicodemus, a Pharisee who had previously visited Jesus at night, took the body down from the cross. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds in weight, a burial fit for royalty. Together they wrapped Jesus' body with the spices in strips of linen according to Jewish burial customs. The tomb where they laid him was new, one that Joseph had cut out of the rock in which no one had yet been laid. They rolled a big stone in front of the entrance and went away. The women who had followed Jesus from Galilee saw the tomb and how his body was laid in it. They went home and prepared spices and perfumes, intending to return after the Sabbath to properly anoint the body. Meanwhile, remembering Jesus' predictions about rising again, the chief priests and Pharisees went to Pilate and asked for the tomb to be secured until the third day. Pilate gave them a guard of soldiers and told them to make the tomb as secure as they knew how. So they went and made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting the guard. It seemed the story was over. The tomb was sealed. The guard was set. Death had apparently won. But as we know, this was only the beginning. Why does all this matter? Why go into such detail about the suffering and death of Jesus? Because understanding the depth of what happened changes everything about how we see the cross. This wasn't just a tragic end to a good teacher's life. This wasn't just a martyr dying for his beliefs. The medical reality, the historical facts, the supernatural phenomena, all point to something far more significant. The prophecies in Isaiah, written centuries before, described with eerie precision what would happen. He was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Jesus himself had predicted exactly how he would die and why. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. What happened on that cross was the fulfillment of a divine plan, the solution to humanity's deepest problem. Sin and death entered the world through one man's disobedience. Salvation and life came through one man's perfect sacrifice. The cross wasn't just an instrument of torture. It became the meeting place between divine justice and divine mercy, the place where, as one theologian put it, God's wrath and mercy met together, righteousness and peace kissed each other. What can we learn from this account of the crucifixion? First, we learn about the devastating reality of sin. If we ever wonder how seriously God takes sin, we need look no further than the cross. This was the price required to deal with it. Second, we see the extent of God's love. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Jesus endured the full horror of crucifixion, not because he had to, but because he chose to, for us. Third, we discover the power of forgiveness. Even in his agony, Jesus prayed for those who were killing him. The cross demonstrates that no sin is beyond God's capacity to forgive. Fourth, we witness the defeat of death itself. What seemed like defeat on Friday became victory on Sunday. The cross and resurrection together reveal that death does not have the final word. Finally, we understand our value in God's eyes. The cross answers the question of how much we're worth to God. We are worth the life of His Son. If this deeper look at the crucifixion has opened your eyes to see it in a new way, please hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you never miss our weekly Bible stories. Each one is designed to help you understand Scripture more deeply and personally. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what really happened on that dark Friday afternoon. And if you have questions or insights about the crucifixion, leave them in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to check out our other videos that explore the life of Jesus, from His birth to His resurrection and beyond. The story doesn't end at the cross. It's only just beginning. Until next time, may you experience the depth of God's love shown through the cross in your own life. God bless you, and we'll see you in our next Bible story.